The 22nd of June 1992 was a stormy day in Panama City. Typical conditions for summer in the Gulf of Panama. The storms were affecting airline traffic in the area, but that evening, Copa Airlines Flight 201 was due to leave on schedule for Cali in Colombia. Copa is Panama's largest airline, flying Boeing 737s. After takeoff, the pilot asked air traffic control for permission to deviate round a storm in the Gulf of Panama. This took the flight over the Darien jungle, one of the most remote areas in Central America. The pilot told the controller that he was turning back onto course, and the flight passed out of radar range. It was never heard from again.
After he mentioned that he was going to rejoin the airway and the controller answering his request about the weather, maybe 2 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, 2 minutes, the signal disappeared.
The search started at dawn. Helicopters and search parties courted the jungle, looking for signs of the crash. The first discovery was a large burnt area in the trees. It looked as though the plane had crashed there. A long technical effort began to solve the mystery of what had downed the aircraft and its 47 passengers and crew. The crash site was miles from any habitation. Panamanian search parties took a day to reach the wreckage. They found pieces of the aircraft lying on the jungle floor. Very quickly, Indian searchers found the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder. One of the so-called black boxes is in an orange case for high visibility. As it was from an aircraft made in the United States, the recorder was flown to Panama City and then to Washington for analysis. It records all cockpit sounds on a continuous loop of tape and is a crucial tool in crash investigations. The Panamanian Director of Civil Aviation, Zosimo Guardia, briefs the press on the finding of the voice recorder.
También debo decirles que se ha logrado comunicar el voice recorder, que es lo que se llama la caja negra.
Boeings are manufactured in the USA, and as is customary, Guardia has requested technical assistance from the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB.
The crash happened on a Saturday evening. I was called early Sunday morning. We got a request from the Panamanian government that a 737 had crashed somewhere in the jungle, or possibly in the ocean. They didn't know at that time. And they requested assistance immediately. Through a series of phone calls with the local FAA, Boeing, the manufacturer of the aircraft, Pratt & Whitney, manufacturer of the engines, we started putting together a team to go down. We arrived in Panama Monday afternoon fairly early. Was given a briefing by the Panamanians.
In spite of the NTSB presence, this is a Panamanian investigation. The Panamanian leader is Ernesto Ponce.
And this area is the route for the cocaine people. They use turbo commanders. They can fly very high.
The combined teams have to decide how they'll tackle the technical investigation. Houter's first step is to take his team to see an intact 737.
When we first arrived on scene, I was taking inventory of the people that were with me. There were several who had never worked around a 737. And they had a sister ship, and so we had them open the airplane up so everybody could look at what does the inside of the cargo compartment look like. What do the cabin overhead storage bins look like, their mounting structures? What's the cockpit look like? Where does the APU mount? Everything you could see about the airplane to try to identify parts. We brought along an FAA bomb specialist, Cal Wahlberg, because of the area. The airplane was going in Latin America to Cali, Colombia. Unfortunately, the first thing you jump at is the possibility of a bomb and terrorists.
But they can't make any easy assumptions. The 737 is the most used airliner in the world. 2,500 have been sold. It's important to find out exactly what went wrong with Copa 201.
We have to find out, did this airplane crash because of a manufacturing defect? Did it crash because there's something designed into the system that pilots don't understand, that the word needs to get out? That seems unlikely in an aircraft that's been in operation as long as the 737, but things happen. You never know what might pop up. There may be something that seemed very reasonable 15, 20 years ago that now is not functioning as designed or is wearing out sooner than predicted. Whatever. We have to look into those.
The investigators set up in a classroom at the Panamanian Aviation School. They study the maintenance records of the crashed aircraft and the documents related to the flight. After studying the paperwork, they're ready to go into the jungle. The team flies for an hour to the nearest airstrip to the crash site. Exceptionally, they've allowed a camera team to accompany them. Because investigations involve sensitive questions of legal liability, this is the first time a whole investigation has been filmed as it happens.
See here, this is the headset for talking to the passengers. They give the announcements. Would be, that's the end of it. But the Panamanian people who were there for the day before we arrived was incredible. They had very little support. First having to clear the area to make a landing and everything else. But on their side, in the first day of the investigation, there were 3 broken legs, 8 snake bites from poisonous snakes, and 1 cardiac arrest. It was severe conditions. This is the center section of the wing. The main landing gear is right there below you, one of the pieces. The other piece is just down the hill.
We want to reconfirm this is the number 1 engine at that last position I gave you?
As we surveyed the site, we decided to set off into a direction that some Indian people the local Indians had been doing some searching where they reported they had seen some other parts of wreckage. As we walked into the area, we found the first body. I was with a Panamanian official and Cal Walbert from the FAA. We came across the first body. One of the first things that we noticed about the body was that it was unclothed. We then found 2 or 3 other bodies in the immediate area, and they were all unclothed also. We had heard discussions, and in our training over the years, we knew that the lack of clothes generally indicates that the people came out of the airplane at a high speed, and the clothes were ripped off through a high-speed breakup. When I first came to this job, I had some concerns about what it would be like approaching an accident scene where we've got death and dismemberment. I found it disturbing in a way that it didn't keep you from doing your job. I think you see the chance that you could do something to keep it from happening again helps you.
The searchers found 47 bodies. All the crash victims were accounted for. These bodies have already furnished a first clue to the crash. The aircraft broke up at high speed. They will now be minutely examined for traces that might point to fire or to the explosion of a bomb.
If in fact you had a bomb in the cargo area, depending on the size of the device, the size of the bomb, you could very easily get some components of the bomb, such as hot parts, battery parts, parts of the container. Let's say it was inside of a radio. You may get parts of that radio actually that would penetrate the floor and be a passenger sitting directly over top of it might in fact become embedded in their feet, in their legs, if they had their legs spread out. If the device was underneath the seat itself, it could be in their buttocks area. If a flight attendant's walking by with a drink cart or a service cart, they could have it in their extremities. If it's up in the overhead, you're going to get it up in the upper torso and the head area. And that's why we go to the medical examiner and we ask that they do a full body x-ray.
A few days later, in their Washington labs, the NTSB examined the cockpit voice recorder. If there had been a bomb, the sound might appear on the tape.
What happens in this particular recorder is it's a coaxial recorder, or it has two types of reels, one on top of the other.
The results of the examination are very disappointing.
The last recording on the tape was a flight that occurred about 7-8 days prior to the accident flight. The tape had broken and quit running, the 7-8 days before, so we didn't have the voice recorder for the accident flight. We've had the recorder looked at, inspected. It was in fairly good condition.
But when they opened up the box, they found a bird's nest of tape tangled in the top of the recorder.
Possibly during the last maintenance, a couple of screws were left out, or a couple of washers left out on rebuild that allowed the tension level to get too high in the tape and broke the tape.
The team checked with the airport control tower. They're looking for any recording of sound from Flight 201.
Is there a tape recording from the night of the accident?
We lose the power.
Okay. We're trying to determine which pilot was talking on the radios, because the pilot normally talking on a radio is not the pilot flying the aircraft. So we're trying to figure out which pilot was flying the aircraft.
The interest here was that the captain of the flight was one of the highest time pilots, in fact was the highest time pilot. He had #1 seniority of the airline. The co-pilot or first officer was one of the most junior pilots with the airline. And so we would like to have known who was flying the airplane.
As the days passed, the Indian and Panamanian searchers were finding more pieces of the aircraft. The location of each was noted, then it was brought to a collection point, identified and catalogued.
And I went a little farther to the right, and I've got a microwave oven from the galley, it looks like. Copy, #1 engine.
Is this the engine that he was taking us to, or is
No,
another one?
this is the other one.
This is their other one.
This is number 2.
In Panama City, the investigators were looking for any sign of faults or failures that might have caused the crash or been caused by it.
They've scratched through the paint right down to the aluminum, but there's no deposit there.
The team was puzzled by the fact they were still missing large parts of the aircraft and by the pattern of the wreckage.
And we just are missing too much of this section here and that.
Okay.
And that could have come off.
I'm reading.
The piece that mates with that was right here.
Okay.
Then I found the right wingtip. With
Why don't we draw that in here while we're at it?
You're probably stronger than I do, but
Just get a location.
Yeah, we changed it to we all agree, I guess.
right here was
Even coming into the engine.
Well, number 6.
number 6.
Okay, number 6.
Reporting to Zosimo Guardia, Tom Houter admits his bewilderment.
We're finding pieces from the front of the airplane with pieces from the rear of the airplane, and vice versa. We're finding right side pieces on the left side. I mean, there's no pattern. You take a look at the wreckage diagram, there's no pattern to how things came down. It's all over the place. And that is really confusing. I mean, the other accident I had before this was complicated. We had the whole airplane, it was burned, but it was all in one spot, and it was just a matter of trying to go through and understand what happened. And it took time to prove that by simulations and by tests, but at least we had the whole airplane.
This is a very heavy section airplane. It has the landing gear, it has the center wing structure, which is very heavy. This other piece that broke off should be lighter depending on the size. It could have went on beyond it, down in here.
There's an area here with big broken trees, but no parts found. There's a deep valley, and something is in here, but nobody found any parts. But we know something is in there.
From the air, it looks like something
you stand on the ground and you see big trees broken. And there's nothing.
But people who've been there haven't seen anything, so we'd like to go back to that area and see if this piece that goes in between here, or between here, I guess, if that's it over there. That may be a substantial part of the airplane we haven't seen. Okay. Yeah.
They'd found the cockpit, and another mystery. The only sign of the captain was his unbuckled seatbelt. At the bottom of the wreckage, they could see the body of the co-pilot.
I can see an arm over here.
Yeah.
Where's the captain's seat? Where's the captain? Here's the seat. You see, there's the floor, captain's floor track. This is the captain's seat. How'd you get out? You should be lying on top of the co-pilot, hitting this side, not...
Could be.
Subsequently, when the cockpit was cut open, he was found beside the first officer. But it did raise the question as to, it's very unusual for pilots not to have their seatbelt on.
The co-pilot's father places a memorial to his son. The first funeral is held. Family and the close-knit airline community mourn one of the 5 flight attendants. This is Panama's first major plane crash in 40 years. In the jungle, the investigators are finding more burnt wreckage.
Ooh. Boy, missed that one.
It's got a number on it, so why don't we get the number?
Turn over and I'll take a picture.
They're beginning to think that the plane was on fire before it crashed. Aircraft remains that show traces of fire on the inside point in this direction.
So this is Cal again. We're back up in the area that I was in that first day, and we're finding pieces of obvious burn aircraft.
Is that right?
Yeah, we found that 3 section of seats again, and now we've got a window belt area that's really sooted. One window's missing. Well, 3 windows are missing. The one that's intact is sooted, and the frame members are all sooted up.
The inside or outside?
Inside.
Really? Okay.
Forward cargo door. Forward cargo door butts in right on that edge there, Bob.
And so what we're saying is
it's upside down.
Yeah, we're seeing sooting forward of this cargo area, because there's the liner.
Yeah. I mean, look how this is bubbled here.
Yep. This is 4PZ. Everything we've seen so far has been sooting. This is a clear evidence of a major fire.
The parts leave by helicopter for a 10-minute journey to the village of Sambu. Most of the wreckage has been found and carried in by Cooney Indians, who are paid cash for each item. The Cooney have walked in for miles to join the salvage operation. and the local village economy is given an inflationary burst from their earnings. To be closer to the crash site, the investigating team have set up a forward base in Sambu. Communications specialists from the United States have set up a satellite link with Washington. The investigators tell their head office about their growing conviction that there was a fire on board.
The biggest thing we found, we've got a section of overhead storage bin, honeycomb material that's completely burned. It's been through one hell of a fire, but there's no fire around it. We feel pretty convinced that that thing was on fire prior to the breakup. It was found a long ways away from the burn area.
In Panama City, the pieces of wreckage that show evidence of burning are minutely examined.
After that part was broken out of the airplane, they could have been flying through the air and punched a tree.
Boy, that'd be kind of a...
What we were trying to find out is whether this piece burned up in the airplane while it was intact, or whether it burned during the breakup or after the breakup.
Evidence for or against a fire is most likely to come from an examination of the victims. A team of American pathologists arrives to help the Panamanians, who don't have enough specialists to cope quickly with so many bodies.
Cuando hay una prótesis, the individuals here start collecting the records by calling up the parents and the family members of the next of kin. Call, tell who their dentist was. The dentist forward their faxes that record to us, and then we don't know who these people are.
After 47 autopsies, the pathologists deliver their report.
One of the questions that we were asked is, was there a fire aboard? Based on the examination of the remains that we have made and that the Panamanian authorities had made prior to our arrival, there's no indication of any fire in the passenger compartment. This is based on, number one, we have no evidence of burning or singeing of skin, and there's no evidence of soot or smoke inhalation in tracheas. And all of the tracheas on all 47 people who were examined were open and were examined just for that.
In both the pilot and the co-pilot, no soot was found in the airway, there were no shrapnel injuries, and there were no thermal injuries or burns evident upon either body.
No fire before the crash, no explosion. For the investigators, it's back to square one, a dead end. But that's common in crash investigation.
As crude as it may sound, the investigation, we take at the onset a shotgun approach, that everything's suspect. And so we're going down every alley. And of course, many are going to turn up to be blind. We expected that sometimes it's going to be embarrassing. You put a lot of effort into something that turns out to be nothing. So going through all of that, it came down to no, there wasn't smoke or fire inside. And we had to start looking for other sources for the accident.
The turning point in the investigation comes when the tape from the second black box, the flight data recorder, is analyzed in Washington. These numbers give a second-by-second account of the readings on the pilot's instrument panel. This is now the only testimony to what happened in the cockpit minutes before the crash. This recorder worked perfectly, but as the data scrolls onto the screen, it paints a picture of an aircraft behaving in a way which mystifies the investigating team in Panama.
Can they fax us a copy of that data tomorrow?
The data from the flight recorder doesn't correspond to anything they've seen before. That night, they discuss it in their hotel room.
He's holding that for 20 seconds, that's a pretty good time. He then makes a left turn, 35 degrees back to 130, and that's excessive. Second and a half, he's in a 112 degree right wing down, so he's over the top.
But look how fast he does this. He goes from 3 degrees, right roll.
And how much is that, 5 seconds?
No, that is in 1 second.
1 second.
That's 1 second.
Wow. Can that data be mistaken?
We're going through this data completely. We don't know. What my engineers are telling me is what we see is what's there, but we got. Wow. But this gets better. So you come on down to the data.
It's pretty constant.
It's pretty constant. But now look at this. You get down here, and suddenly it goes from left wing down 36 degrees to right wing down 25 degrees. Once again in 1 second.
1 second, and then what?
Then a second later, it's 115 degrees. Wow. So that's, there's a lot of this data that you take a look at and it doesn't make any sense.
To try and visualize what the readings mean, the NTSB make a computer animation from the output of the flight data recorder. It picks up Copa 201 after it's made a detour round the storm, just before it turns back onto course. The vertical bars indicate 5-second intervals along the aircraft's path.
Now he starts to turn to the right to get back onto his original course. By the G-trace, you can tell he's in smooth air. He's out of the storm, and probably at this point he's told the passengers they can turn off their take off their seat belts and walk freely around the cabin. Now the airplane starts to level back, but it doesn't quite level. It still has a 4-degree right bank in it. And it's going straight, but it has this 4-degree right bank, so it's not flying in the smooth, normal pattern. This is very difficult for the airplane to do. Now you see it all of a sudden snaps to the left, about 35 degrees left wing down. And once again, the heading doesn't change here very much, but the airplane's flying in this severe bank, and this, I believe, is beyond the authority of the rudder to fly with this much bank attitude in the airplane. And it continues this for quite some time, where suddenly it's going to snap to the right. And once again, the rate of the snap is beyond the rate the 737 can do. You're talking aerobatic airplane here, not your basic bus transport type. Once the nose is down, it's through the inverted, airspeed builds rapidly past 480 knots. The altitude is dropping off rapidly. And we lose the recorder below 10,000 feet, at which time the airplane broke up due to aerodynamic forces. We took the data from the flight data recorder, we loaded it into the Boeing simulator, and asked various pilots to try to fly the data.
The pilots were presented with exactly the same instrument readings as the Copa pilots.
We used the data to try to understand what the pilots did, what they could have done, how the switches are set, what data is being presented to them by the instrumentation. It's a very important investigative tool.
Out of 50 simulated flights reacting to the same data as was seen by the Copa pilots, 49 times the pilots crashed the aeroplane. In Panama, the focus of the investigation has shifted to a possible fault in the instruments. The team returned to the remains of the cockpit.
¡Óyela!
If the data from the flight recorder shows the aircraft doing impossible aerobatics, then maybe it never performed those maneuvers. Maybe it was the readings from the instruments that were faulty, leading the pilots to crash the aircraft. There are mysteries here, too.
That's interesting. Calvin altitude is reading 25,000.
Right.
Something opened up.
But how about if we were descending, it should move also.
Sure.
Down.
It should move.
Why stay on 35,000?
If you lose electrical, it's electrically driven.
Well, but so is this.
Yeah.
Suspicion focuses on the instrument that tells the pilot at what angle the aircraft is flying, the artificial horizon, or ADI. On a dark night, it's the only way to tell if the aircraft is level, and the apparently violent maneuvers of Copa 201 seem to have been in response to the ADI. Its failure rate is designed to be 1 in a billion. Most pilots trust their ADI.
This is a control for a system that can tell what is level in relation to the Earth. It can also tell if the airplane is level with that, or if it has one wing up, one wing down, or the nose is above the horizon or below the horizon. And it will display this information on this instrument. The blue part represents the sky above the horizon, and the dark part represents the Earth below the horizon. This one does the same thing and displays that same information on this indicator on the other side of the cockpit. Normally, the left-hand side displays information here, the right-hand side displays information there. As long as this switch is in the center position. If one of these systems should fail, then we can use this switch to put both displays on the good instrument, like so. If both of these systems are operating normally, that switch should remain in the center position, and you have two independent systems, one backing up the other for safety.
If both the main instruments were to fail, there is a third, smaller, independent ADI on the panel in between the pilots, slightly off their line of sight. And the team find that the pilots have selected both ADIs on one gyroscope.
The selector for vertical gyros on the compass.
There's both on comp 1.
Yeah.
This is an important discovery.
I don't know if somebody just moved that, but...
By examining the electrical relays that were commanded by the selector switch, they confirm that when the aircraft power was on, the switch was indeed selecting one gyro for both instruments. They're satisfied that it was not moved on impact or in the dismantling of the cockpit. So at the time of the crash, the pilots had lost a valuable element of safety. Was this deliberate on their part, because one of the indicators had gone wrong, or had they made a mistake? And in any case, what about the third, independent instrument? All the instruments were gathered and investigated. Every one of them had a service record. The aircraft had originally been operated by a British airline, and so this phase of the investigation took Greg Phillips far from Panama.
1597-23, serial number 801-008. We decided, after looking at the records that were available in Panama City, to go to Luton and take a look through the records of the airplane since it was delivered from Boeing. We followed the history of all the cockpit instruments that we were concerned with from the time they crashed, from the day they crashed to the day that they were born at Boeing, or the day they were first delivered. The airplane, I believe, was initially delivered, I think, in 1980. It had from Boeing to Britannia, so it had several changes. We looked through as an instrument would be removed from the airplane. We looked at the records to see why it was removed. We followed the instrument to the repair shops around the UK, the records there, to see what had been done to repair the instruments. We were looking for a trail of problems with the airplane or with instruments in that part of the airplane systems.
After exhaustive checks, they found nothing wrong in the history of Copa 201's instruments. But the investigators still believed that an instrument error was at the root of the airliner's fatal aerobatics. They made a new simulation. Here, the grey image does what the instruments were telling the pilots. The stick image shows what the team think the aircraft was really doing.
He'd been deviating around a thunderstorm and now has to make a turn to get back onto course. It's a gradual turn. It appears to be done by autopilot, by the rates. Now the aircraft will start to roll out on course, and you'll notice that the gray airplane will hold a 4-degree bank attitude while the stick figure airplane starts rolling to the left.
As the grey plane, according to the false readings, freezes in a 4-degree right bank, the real plane rolls left. Suddenly, the grey plane snaps round to match reality. Whatever fault was affecting the instruments has gone away, and the pilots realise their true position. They desperately try to level the aircraft by rolling to the right, but the instrument has frozen again, and while the real aircraft rolls almost upside down, the pilots imagine they're still in a left bank. Once again, the instrument unfreezes, and the grey plane snaps round to the right. The pilots are completely caught by surprise. This is when they lose control of the aeroplane.
Over 400 miles an hour, 400 knots, 17,000 feet, 450 knots, 14,000 feet, almost 480 knots, until the data ends at less than 10,000 feet. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Tom Houter and Greg Phillips have come to present their theory to the Panamanian chief investigator and the Panamanian team.
Data from the flight data recorder. Engine.
Once again, they go over the last 70 seconds of the flight.
Here are timing bars. They're just 5 seconds apart. He's leveling out, but he doesn't quite level. He's got a 4-degree bank in it.
The attitude indicator's stuck.
It's stuck at 4 degrees.
That's what he's seeing.
That's what he's seeing. Suddenly it snaps, goes the other direction.
Sticks again.
Now it's stuck at 35 degrees. Bringing it back. He's got a little bump in vertical G, but not much. He's still trying to roll the airplane. There. Now he's in trouble. What you would feel if you were in the cockpit of the aircraft from the passenger compartment was nothing. It was always 1G pushing you in the seat. It was a very smooth, comfortable maneuver up until the time the aircraft was actually almost inverted. They didn't realize they were in trouble until there was no recovery possible.
The first indication we had that something didn't make sense to us was the data showed that the airplane made several rolls and then would stop when it made the roll. The roll would just freeze, and normally airplanes don't do that. They continue moving from one place to another. Looking at this data a little closer, we started to look for possible explanations of what caused the data to look like that. Did the airplane really do that? We didn't think so. Was something failing, and what was it?
What makes the theory hard to swallow for the Panamanians is that in all of the tests of the instruments, the team have found no faults whatsoever.
Our primary concern initially was to go test the attitude indicator, what the captains and the co-pilots. We tested those at Collins and Cedar Rapids. We found no failures. The attitude indicators for both sides worked. We turned them, we banked them, we pitched them, we rolled them, we put them in a hot chamber to heat them up to see if they would fail. We did several tests, and they worked. After the crash, they worked just fine. That's when the discussions started about what could happen, what would cause this trace to stick this way. The only part of the system that we haven't looked at, or hadn't looked at until this time, was the wiring between the components, between the gyro provides raw information and what the pilot sees. We intend to begin this afternoon and over the next couple of days to examine that wiring and look for any possibilities that there had been some failure of that wire.
If you don't get some kind of proof with the cables regarding that point, this is a theory.
It's at the safety board, we determine probable cause. And I would say that we have eliminated every other possibility that could bring this airplane down. There's no indication of bombs, terrorism, weather, control surface, engines. Through the process of elimination, we go down through it and we take a look, and if everything we've seen of the wreckage, of the instrumentation, and of the data, this is the only piece that doesn't make sense. Now, Greg's absolutely right. We can look at this whole wire bundle, and we may find nothing wrong with it. But something caused this instrument to read this way.
Let's see. What
One more trip to the jungle.
to do? Pitch.
The investigators are sure that their theory is the only one that explains the crash. But they must now test the wiring in the aircraft to see if they can find the fault.
There's a big clamp here.
As long as we can keep going to the next place.
Okay.
See, this here is, what about a ground lock?
Those little ladies are Boeing tying knots.
We did 22 and now 23 are okay. So we're good on
This
those.
one hold together again? Okay, I'm moving 20. Okay, so we go 1. Good pointer.
Oh, man.
Nothing?
Nothing.
I'm gonna go back to 22.
Yeah, good.
22 good. 21, I'm gonna go down a little bit.
Go down to 17.
Okay, here's 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. And then back to 22.
Several things could go wrong with these wires. They could short circuit, break apart, or come loose from their connectors. But the on-again, off-again effect in the instrument data looks as if it was caused by an intermittent, occasional fault. These are the hardest faults of all to find, especially in the miles of wiring in the airliner. It's a grinding, painstaking process. And then a Panamanian engineer reports that he has found a loose wire.
What, this one just came out easily? Okay, no pull.
Okay.
It just fell.
This is a 4205.
It doesn't pull. It wasn't pulled, it
Yeah.
just fell. What was its condition before it just fell out? Was it hanging on by a strand or?
Well, we can get into that. We'll look at that and take a look at it.
Yeah.
We have the whole wire bundle from the airplane here, and they were pulling each of the wires out of the connector, and this one wire just fell out.
It looks as if the loose wire is the one that connects the gyroscope to the ADI. Confirmation about the specific role of this wire has to come from the Collins Instrument Company in America.
We need to get hold of Collins pretty quick. In fact, we're trying to get hold of Collins right now, so I think I better get off the phone.
He's on vacation? Just a minute. He's on
Yes, I will.
vacation.
Oh, okay. Just
a minute.
Just a moment, please. Ah, shoot.
Talk to this guy and find out who would be able to.
Can you hang on a minute, please? Hello?
This is Joe.
Hello? Yes. Yes. My name
No,
is
this is
Ike,
Dennis. Who's
Ike
in the phone?
Maeda, with the Boeing Company.
No, the pin and the wire are no longer attached to each other. That's the problem. Yes, exactly.
If this is the right wire, then the last piece of the puzzle is in place. Boeing will have to notify maintenance engineers round the world to check this wire in thousands of Boeing 737s.
In the wire, one of the wires kind of came loose and fell out, apparently, and we wanted to find out what impact it would have on the ADI indication if that wire happened to, say, disconnect. Oh, okay. I just wanted to confirm that the error signal, if that is lost, then the instrument amplifier will consider it zero error coming from the ADI, and thus the roll indication will freeze. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
And what do you get a flag?
No, you wouldn't get a flag because in this case, since there's no error signal, no flag.
As it's prepared for sending to the lab, Greg Phillips has second thoughts about the correct identity of the wire. The team use videotape shot by our cameraman to double check.
So the red wire in the 20728 there, I think?
Okay, yeah, correct.
Hanging on by a string?
Well, we can get into that. We'll look at that and take a look at it. 42 has got a wire in it. It's 43.
Okay.
It's 43. We'll call it 43, but it wasn't 43.
Just fell out. Okay, but look now.
What would the condition before it just fell out? Was it hanging on by a strand? Or?
Well, we can get into that. We'll look at that and take a look at it.
Where's 42?
Where's 42 in the quantity?
42 is the second open hole right up here.
They're both empty.
Right.
Yeah, why did I say it had a wire in it? We just were so anxious to find the 42 wire broken or the 43 wire, we just called it that.
You just mentioned what's
It came out of our head.
on the tape.
Yeah. I honestly wouldn't go to the trouble to check those other airplanes.
Through all of our searching the jungle, through all the wiring traces, everything else, we never found where the intermittent failure was. We looked everywhere. We took apart the whole front end of the airplane. And the data recorder shows it was there. The way the airplane was wired, we know that was what the pilot saw. But we never actually found what caused that signal failure.
They didn't have the final proof. So they went back and tested the instruments at the manufacturers and simulated the disconnection of the wire from the gyroscope and then its reconnection. This reproduced exactly the freezing and the apparent wild maneuvers that they observed from the data in the Copa crash. This confirms their probable cause.
Looking at the data, looking at the way the aircraft behaved, we can come up with a scenario that fits why. We can see how the pilots could have been led to believe that they were doing the right thing when in fact they weren't. We can document how that type of failure can exist and what would have happened. We cannot allow one to crash and not find out why. Because if one happens tomorrow, we'd be liable, if nothing else, for not being able to tell the world, yes, we know what happened here, there are corrective actions that can be made, and this is what needs to be done.
That has taken more than 18 months' work by investigators. Spread between government agencies, airlines, and manufacturers, it has cost more than $1 million. The Panamanians are about to publish their final report. It will be read and acted on around the world. As well as the engineering questions, it will have to address the crew's training. Why did they continue to trust their main instruments once they'd switched both to one gyroscope? And why weren't they more aware of their standby instrument? These human questions are, as so often, at the heart of the accident.
If you just tuned in, you might like to know that this programme will be shown again this coming Saturday afternoon at 2:10 here on BBC2.